Awesome. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. Having the opportunity to connect with people like you on screen in little squares from around the world or in person has just been a real delight for me over the last year. The book we're going to talk about is the ADKAR Advantage. And just to give you a little bit of background, I'm going to share out some slides here in just a minute to share some more detail. But we do have at least one ProSci certified change practitioner other than myself on the screen. So the discipline of change management is, an interesting one. And I'd love for you just to go over to chat and type in what you see or feel is the connection between change management as a discipline, the people side of change, and your service design work. So, what is the connection between change management and service design? Just get your brains processing there for a moment. I want to make sure that you see that there is a direct connection between what you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish in your body of work with your group, your teams, your organization, your industry. A direct connection between designing solutions, products and services and solutions to solve and address business needs and opportunities. And the fact that if we don't design things that people are able and willing to adopt, then we don't have the transformation that you're trying to do, or the changes, or the continuous improvement, or all the things, right? So, empathy for sure. I see that one come up. Transformation at scale. The things that we're doing impact the way people do their work. Sometimes there's direct changes to process or systems or tools or job roles, but there are also changes and impacts to mindset and beliefs and attitudes and critical behaviors. So when we think about change, designing or redesigning involves change. Absolutely. We imagine a different future state. That's what design is all about. We can do this better, faster, easier. We can look at incremental change. We can look at dramatic, radical changes. But all of that, when we think about who is impacted by the changes that we're introducing. I'm gonna look over here real quick. Oh, Rachel, you're a psychologist turned service designer. So, behavior change, absolutely. When we think about how people behave and think now and what the ideal future state is, how do we help people make that journey between the current state and that ideal future state? Sophie, I see your note. Service design pushes people to adopt a whole new way of thinking and work. So I have a current way that I believe about things. Think about something like this. You've got a sales team who in the past in their sales role has been very transactional. So maybe it's a financial services firm and they've been very transactional in the way they engage with clients. But then now the bank or the financial institution is implementing a new strategy around relational selling and relational engagement with customers and clients. To go from transactional to relational is a set of words, but it's a bunch of beliefs and behaviors. So the conversations I'll have with customers and clients will be different. The questions that I ask will be different. The systems and tools that I might use to go from transactional to relational might be different. So all of those things fall under the domain of the discipline of change management, which is all about the people side of change. So we can design what is changing, the technical side of the change, and then who is changing. So the why and the what is one thing, the how and the who is another thing. And that's where the discipline of change management fits in. I love that facing wicked problems that need change management in different phases. Now, there's been a lot of great things happening in the design world around the introduction of agile and iterative. I'm an IDEO certified change practitioner, so I've been through lots of the IDEO programs, empathy, human-centered, doing this through the lens of prototyping and testing and verifying and validating. But at the end of the day, people still have to adopt the changes that we're implementing through our design work. So, just to step back in time, the organization I work for is a company called ProSci. And ProSci is an expert leader, world leader. We're a global company operating in many countries around the world or through partners to help people learn a methodology and a practice for how people go through change. So, the ProSci Certified Change Practitioner course is a 3-day program to unpack the whole ProSci methodology and learn how it all comes to place. So, sitting behind all of the ProSci methodology is a critical question. I'm going to share out some slides with you to just kind of step through some of the key thinking. And all of this is captured in the book. And so this resource, the ADKAR Advantage, you can see the picture of the book there on the screen. I wrote it as a ProSci publication. So I've been with ProSci since 2016. I've been in the change management discipline since 2011 formally. I was exposed to ADKAR in 2006. So I've been thinking and processing on this for almost 20 years, but I spent over 20 years in the information technology industry. And I was always concerned about the end users, who has to do their jobs differently. I called myself an end user advocate because I didn't even know there was a discipline called change management. So ProSci was founded in 1994 by a gentleman named Jeff Hyatt. You see a quote from Jeff here on the screen. This was the probing question that he had in the late 1990s. He was an engineer working for Bell Laboratories at the time. And he was observing across organizations that there were some changes that were quite successful and there were others that were quite unsuccessful or failed. And he said, why is it that some changes fail while others succeed? So he studied change for 4 years across 700 organizations looking for change patterns. So, what were the patterns? What were the indicators of successful change? So, you see his quote here: the secret to successful change lies beyond the visible and busy activities that surround change. Some of those visible and busy activities might be communications or training or leadership engagement or people manager support. But at its core, change is rooted in something simpler, and that is how to facilitate change with one person. So there isn't anything called organizational change. There's only individual changes that come together in a composite to create organizational change. So if I've got 25 people in my customer service team or my sales team that are going from transactional to relational, if all 25 people don't make a successful individual change journey, the organization's not going to realize the desired benefits because all 25 people aren't operating with the new mindset and the new tools and the new process and delivering the outcomes that the organization wanted to achieve by investing in that change. So ProSci is a big research company. We've spent over 25 years doing primary research in the discipline of change management. And when we ask organizations to share with us what percentage of the benefits of a particular change depend on people adopting and using that change. And the numbers are like 70, 80, 90%. And you're like, well, why isn't all change people dependent? Well, if I'm in an IT industry and I'm doing some systems cleansing behind the scenes, it doesn't really have an adoption story. We can still get business benefit without having a significant impact on people. But if 70, 80, 90% of our outcomes depend on people changing the way they think, changing the way they do their work, then we need to think about the investment in realizing that benefit. And then when we ask the question, how much are you investing in change management? The numbers come in around 3, 4, 5, 10%. So if we don't invest in realizing the people-driven benefits, we're not going to get the ROI at the back end of our projects. So that's what Jeff was really playing with. He was like, why do we do all these things? What are the outcomes? And that's where the ADKAR model came from. So ADKAR is an acronym. and it stands for Awareness, Desire, Knowledge, Ability, and Reinforcement. And chapter 2 of the book is all of the ADKAR elements explained in great detail, but I'll give you a high level view. But let me just give you a quick look at the book. I wrote the book, Jeff Hyatt wrote a book. It was published in 2006. There are lots of stories in the book that ran out of their dates. There was a story, for example, about Lance Armstrong. If you're familiar with who Lance Armstrong is, that didn't age well. So it's a great book, and we've got so much more research and so much more story and so much more examples of how ADKAR benefits the adoption story. So in early 2023, ProSci asked me, I was on the senior leadership team. I've been doing change management for a long time. I'm an ADKAR advocate, to write the updated, refreshed book. So instead of just writing a straightforward book, I wanted to put some really interesting dynamics around this. I have a bookshelf hiding behind one of these doors in my study here that has hundreds of books on it. And I think about, have I read all of those books? The answer is no. But I have opened them and I looked at the table of contents, and I know there's something in there that I want to know and understand. It's hard to find it sometimes. So I wrote the book into 3 separate parts with lots of content. I created what I call reader plans and profiles. So if you're really new to ADKAR, don't try to take on the whole book. Just read part 1. You're going to get enough in part 1 to give you what you need to start activating change through the lens of ADKAR. If you're a people leader, a team leader, a project manager, maybe part 2 is good. And if you're in the role of building change in your organization as a capability, then part 3. So I broke the books into sections, and I give you a guide for how to find what's important and relevant to you based on your profile. I also included stories from over 50 ProSci customers and clients around the world, 20 countries, stories that are individual, some are organizational. Anna Boleyn gets her son to eat broccoli. A major pharmaceutical company had 50,000 people go through digital transformations successfully through the lens of ADKAR. So everything that's individual, organizational, as well as personal and professional. And then there's 13 downloadable resources. So if you've got a QR code in there to pull down some templates and resources. So that's how I designed the book. I want it to be actionable. I want you to activate your capabilities through the book. Take your own ADKAR journey using the book to learn about ADKAR and understand the impact and knowing how and being able, and then reinforcing that. So there's even some checklists in there and things that you can use in your body of work. So I wanted it to be not just a book to read, but a book to use and a book to apply. So let me just share with you a little bit about the 3 parts. Part 1 of the book is all about how one person makes a change. Think about Jeff's quote, that there is no such thing as organizational change. There's only individual change. So how does one person make a change? How do you, how do I, how does everybody around us, personally and professionally, go through change? And then we scale that in part 2 to organizational change. So how do you take the ADKAR model from an individual change model to an organizational framework for change? And that's what part 2 is all about. So how can we influence organizational change by integrating with structure and process, integrate with your service design process, integrate with your product development, integrate with the way that you do product and service design inside of your organization, project management, all of the complementary disciplines that come alongside of our work. And then part 3 is about how do organizations become better at change. So if your organization's very immature in change as a capability, there are organizations in the world that are very mature at change. They have adopted their change capability as a strategic advantage in their marketplace. If we are good at change, we can take on more change and we can meet or exceed customer needs and objectives, hit those scary, complex problems, and so on and so forth. So the book is intended to be building, right? Part 1 to part 2 to part 3. But I wanted to just focus on chapter 2 for a minute. Now, chapter 1, there's an introduction and a preface. This is the table of contents. And I did send out a sample of the book. I think, Arun, that you may have shared that with everybody. If not, we can do that. It's just a PDF. It has the forward, the preface, the introduction, the table of contents in chapter 1. Chapter 1 is all about Jeff, and I wanted intentionally to articulate the work that Jeff went through to create the ADKAR model. It didn't just come to him in, an overnight sleep where he said, "Oh, ADKAR, that's an acronym that makes sense." But it was through all of those years of work. So in chapter 2, I introduce and explain ADKAR. So if it's new or familiar to you, it's the extension or of the application. If you've never heard of it before, this gives you a description for each of the ADKAR elements. So inside of that, I've got some really key content in chapter 2. Number 1, change is not a switch. Wouldn't it be great if we could just flip a switch and all the changes that need to come alongside the work that we're doing would just happen automatically? But that's not how people adopt change. We go through a very structured process from our current state through transition to our future state. So at the beginning of chapter 2, I introduced the concept that change is a process and gives you some simple visuals and some simple thinking that's easy to share with others. So much of the work that we do in our organizations is to influence other people, to inform and influence. And when you've got simple language, and plain language, you don't talk in jargon, you don't talk technical, but you use things like, change is not a switch. We can't just flip a switch and expect that everybody's going to adopt what we're designing. People go through a change process. They have a current state. They're going to go through transition to arrive at the future state. So the beginning of chapter 2 is all about setting some of that language and introducing the ADKAR model. So again, when Jeff Hyatt was originally building the model, he said, it's not about the busy activities. So when you think about change management, oftentimes people immediately think communication and training. And yes, communication and training are critical elements of ADKAR, but we don't communicate just to communicate. We communicate to build awareness. So awareness is an outcome. Desire is an outcome. Knowledge is an outcome. Ability is an outcome. And reinforcement is an outcome. Now, there's activities that we do to deliver those outcomes, but it's an outcome-oriented building block model. It is sequential, and it is the process every single one of us takes on intellectually through change, whether you've known this in the past or not. So ADKAR is very practical and actionable, and it's based on change patterns. It can be applied at the individual and the organizational level. So I want to just share with you, each of the book sections, each chapter has some learning objectives. So it's intended to be, as I said, I want you to engage actively with the content. At the beginning of every chapter, I've got some learning objectives, what you should be able to do. And at the end of every chapter, there are some questions that you can feedback. So those questions are in reflection. Do I understand what I need to understand? Again, the intent was to be very plain language centered. So let's talk about awareness for a moment. So awareness is, what is the nature of the change? Why is the change needed? What is the risk of not changing? Change begins with understanding why. Why is a change happening? And without a clear understanding of why, we don't step into the change effectively. So if you've ever thought about this, something's happening in your organization and, people are saying, well, we're going to send you to training and we need to come up to speed on this. And you're like, why are we doing this? What is the compelling why for the change that's happening? Once you understand why, then you go through desire. What's in it for me? And I get to make a personal choice to engage and participate in the change. Desire is the most difficult, but there are influences, there are individual influencers, there are organizational motivators to help us go through our desire building block. But it's all about making a decision to engage and participate. And then knowledge, knowing how, understanding how to make the change, getting training, learning new skills, and then converting knowledge into ability. So I can go to golf lessons all day long and I can learn how to play golf. That doesn't mean I am able to play golf, right? Converting knowledge and the intellectual side of it to actual practical, actionable behaviors. So ability is where the benefits come from. When people go from knowledge to ability, they're able to perform in the way that's expected. And then, of course, reinforcement. If we don't reinforce what's happening, then people may go backwards and they may revert to the way they've done things in the past. And sometimes reinforcement is just a simple recognition and reward. Sometimes it's changes in compensation structure, it's engagement from senior leadership, it's changing how we measure and monitor performance. There's lots of things that we can do to reinforce changed behaviors. So that's the ADKAR model. And one of the key elements in ADKAR is if you were to give each of the ADKAR elements a score from 1 to 5 based on a particular change, the first ADKAR element that scores a 3 or less is considered the barrier point, and that's where people are stuck. So if you're implementing a change, look at the top right one where awareness is the barrier point. If you're implementing a change and you ask 50 people or 5 people who are impacted by a change, do you know why this change is happening? If they say, I don't know, I don't have any idea, I don't know what the connection is, then you've got an awareness barrier point. So pushing farther into desire, knowledge, and ability is not going to serve you. Now, if they've already got awareness and desire is the barrier point, like the bottom left, it can be very frustrating if we just keep communicating and we don't talk about the engagement activities to help build desire. So there's actually some diagnostics and some tools and some templates, as I mentioned, to learn how to do an ADKAR assessment. And all of those are part of the downloadable resources inside of the book. Now, this slide is just a summary. This is also, we call this ADKAR model on a page. This is also in the book. I understand why, I have decided to, I know how, I am able, and I will continue to. So this is ADKAR on a page, and then there's very specific things that build and trigger building each of those ADKAR elements. So there are stories, there are examples, there are all kinds of things in the book to be able to help you learn the model. And chapter 2 gives you all of the guidance behind what would people say, what would people do, how does all of this work, in order to be able to take people through their ADKAR journey. So this is change through the lens of an individual change model. So change is individual first before it's organizational. Think of a personal change. Anna Boleyn getting her son to eat broccoli. You know, he was a 6-year-old who, gosh, they live in Brazil. So I love that, you know, we've got representation from that part of the world. And her son was starting to play soccer. And he wanted to be stronger and faster. So she talked to him not about, as a parent, you should eat broccoli because it's good for you. But she said, you know, food has nutrients and nutrients help our bodies in different ways. And broccoli is a nutrient-rich food that will help you get stronger and faster. So she went where he was, what his motivators were, and then she took him through the ADKAR journey. And she tells this amazing story now that they shop together and they build food plans together based on the nutrients of food because her son has an interest in his physical body and strength and his speed as a soccer player. And she said, you know, she never would have gotten there if she hadn't done this through the ADKAR lens. So it's individual, it's organizational. As I said, 50,000 people at a pharmaceutical company that was going through 1,500 digital transformations from old systems and databases to new, and they architected the entire journey through the lens of ADKAR. So I hope you deep dive further into some of the content. Chapter 2 is if you haven't heard of ADKAR or if you want to, dive deeper and learn more. Chapter 2 is about learning each of the ADKAR elements, and then everything else in the rest of the book continues to build on top of that. So that's what I just wanted to share with you in terms of a formal overview or introduction to the body of content in the book, and specifically chapter 2, but the learning objectives, the reflections kind of help shape what I'm hoping you take away. And again, those QR codes that give you downloadable resources to be able to use and apply the work. So that's what it's all about. So I want to switch over now, get rid of my slides, and just go into some question and answer time. So what do you want to know more about? And it doesn't have to be on part 1. It could be any of the concepts of change management. I'm happy to answer your questions.